temperature.
The war in Ukraine has slowed to a relative standstill. After rapid...
I see a lot of news, though, that these mobilized recruits are very shit. They die hundreds every day. They have zero training. They're starting to riot, man. It's crazy what's going on in Russia, man. And you could just hope that at one point it's too much, at one point the glass is too full, and these Russians are fucking rebelling, man. The manipulation and propaganda of Vladimir Putin is just so deeply rooted that it's so hard for these Russians to rise up against this shit.
Counter-offensives in Kharkiv and Kherson throughout September and October. The rate of Ukrainian advance has significantly slowed, and the Russians have started taking up defensive positions, focusing less on mechanized advances and more on long-range strikes on Ukrainian infrastructure.
I have also the weird feeling the longer this war goes, the more Russia is just gonna hurt from this. They believe their sons are dying in a just war for the motherland, and they're proud. I mean, that's what All Quiet on the Western Front kind of shows us, man. In the beginning, they're all happy and proud, but once real life knocks at their door, man...
So in this video, we're going to try and do our best to explain why the war has come to a standstill, what might break the deadlock, and whether this means that it's time to start considering peace negotiations.
I think there can be no peace talks. I think it's impossible to negotiate with Vladimir Putin. His behavior has shown that the only acceptable peace is that Russia withdraws completely from Ukraine, accepts its sovereignty, and accept that they might join NATO and EU. That if the West even supports negotiations that even give a little bit of favor to Putin, it's a backstep to the Ukrainian people.
The war in Ukraine has basically proceeded in 3 phases. In the first phase, which basically begins with the invasion in February,
Alice Schwarzer is a feminist icon in Germany, and she wants to talk to Putin. Kinda ironic. Ugh, they're just idiots. And I don't know why the media is even making reports about these prominent people and their opinions about Ukraine. As Dave Chappelle once said, what is Ja Rule's opinion in these dire times, man?
Taking territory in the north and south of Ukraine. The second phase of the war, which really began in early September, was defined by rapid Ukrainian counteroffensives in Kharkiv, Donbass, and Kherson. However, it now looks like we might be entering in what could be described as the third phase of the war, which apparently began in October and has been defined.
I disagree with that there's a stalemate comment. New reports have shown that Russia is retreating from the Kherson region, knowing it's a war that will just make them attrition, man, and it's not worth the war fighting for.
Relative stasis. In fact, the front lines haven't really shifted for the past month or so, at least since the Ukrainian advance in Kherson along the bank of the
Zelensky will go in
Mink.
history as one of the greatest. I agree with that. Zelensky is going to be in the history books, man. And I respect that guy so fucking much.
And while it's entirely...
Could be a trap. Once again, stop showing so much respect to the Russian army. We look at this now for over a year, almost 2 years. The Russian army is a joke. And you walking around like, it's probably a trap, bro. Bro, come on, man.
Well, the front lines will continue to shift in the future. A rapid counteroffensive, akin to the one we saw in Kherson or Kharkiv.
If I was Ukrainian, man, I would be very loyal to Zelensky. I will put a fucking picture over my dining table, man. I would vote for this guy till the end of my days, bro.
Is looking incredible.
Can you imagine like your country's leader fighting in a war for you, like being like this? Can you imagine Olaf Scholz like, yeah, we're fighting, but I'm gonna go to Madeira real quick, just watching it from afar, okay?
Increasingly unlikely.
Olaf Scholz at the front.
Now, this claim might feel a little premature, and maybe it is. After all, it's only been a month since the last major advance in Kherson, and it's clear that both sides are gearing up for a battle in Kherson City. And there have been reports over the last couple of days that Russian soldiers are leaving the city. And it's worth mentioning that for some reason, the Russian flag has been taken down from Kherson's main administrative building ever since Thursday. Ukrainians were to take Kherson City. This would clearly amount to a serious advance. Nonetheless, with the exception of potentially Kherson, it does seem like the front lines...
I have so much respect. I'm actually planning that when, look, the capitalists of the West are not stupid. They're going to start opening the stock market of Ukraine, rebuilding ETFs, rebuilding funds, and I think I want to actually invest in that, man. Like a nice little 1,000. There will be Ukraine ETFs, and I think they will be lucrative. They're ethical, they rebuilt the country, and I'm very much thinking of getting into Ukraine ETF.
Most stable they've been at any point in the last 9 months. So why is this? Well, in some sense, this is sort of inevitable. This is ultimately how you'd expect a war to progress. They start with a lot of movement, and then the front lines stabilize once both sides have made all the advances.
The problem is, like we just seen All Quiet on the Western Front in World War I, is if you have a stalemate What then becomes interesting is the internal struggles, internal societal struggles, political struggles, and I think Ukraine is winning that war easily without even thinking. Zelensky is very stable, massive support from the West, while Putin is just taking away mom's children's, man. He's sanctioned to death, man. After winter's over, his gas means nothing anymore.
That could easily be
in a stalemate. I see Ukraine
However,
far ahead, man.
there are some things specific to Ukraine that have calcified the conflict. The main reason that the conflict has slowed is a change in strategy from the Russians. In the early phases of the war, Russia was focused on steady, mechanized advances. However, in the last few weeks, a new Russian strategy has emerged, which essentially revolves around taking up defensive positions on the battlefield and then targeting infrastructure, presumably in an attempt to leverage Zelensky into a negotiation to prevent Ukrainians from freezing or stopping.
That's where the West has to help. The West has to help their man. Look at these bitch-ass Russians, man. Can't win the war, so now they throw fucking rockets next to fucking children playgrounds, man. Scum of the earth.
This is evidenced by the fact that since the beginning of October, Russia has been using cruise missiles and Iranian-made kamikaze drones to attack Ukraine's critical infrastructure, including power plants, electricity cables, and water systems. Now, according to Zelensky, Russian strikes have destroyed a third of the country's power stations and seriously damaged 40% of Ukraine's energy infrastructure, leaving some 4.5 million.
The EU is actually working right now on connecting Ukraine to European gas, power, and water infrastructure. That's why I'm actually for once proud of the EU, man, that we're really trying to help Ukraine, and it's very, very sad that there's certain countries in the EU that are just complete fucking cuckolds. Yesterday, when was the Hungarian Independence Day? Some days ago, right? And Viktor Orban has tweeted, "This is the day where we got freedom from them." This is where, he said something day, but he was like, we got freedom from them, we rebelled against them, but he didn't say the name, he was too scared to say Russia, man. It's not Independence Day, it's the Rebellion Day, October 23rd, 1956. Today's National Day of Mourning. They crushed our revolution in 56, but our love for freedom, I don't want to see the they were Russian imperialists, remember? Viktor Orban, man, what a fucking muppet, man.
Million Ukrainians without power. As such, most Ukrainian cities are scheduling rolling blackouts in order to manage electricity demand. And Ukrainian authorities have set up so-called heating points where residents can shelter in the event of an energy shortage. Now, this strategy of destruction is something new, probably because Putin originally wanted to occupy Ukraine. And, well, cutting off electricity and water isn't really a great way to endear yourself to the local population. However, Russia's military command has probably now realized that a peaceful occupation is no longer a possibility and is just trying to defeat Ukraine, even if that means distressing the civilian population.
Isn't that completely insane?
Now, Putin's likely hoping that this strategy
when this war started in February, nobody thought it would go like this, right?
The fear of widespread blackouts in the winter will force the...
I think a lot of Western haters that are like against this war and Ukraine should make peace, I think their brains can't handle this reality. I think that's what's going on.
Zelensky to attempt a negotiated settlement on Putin's terms. And maybe he'd be tempted, because nighttime temperatures in central Ukraine are already hovering around freezing, and Ukrainian winters can be brutally cold. While meteorologists currently forecast a relatively mild winter, the Ukrainian authorities are still understandably worried, which is why they've asked the West to provide 1,500 thermal stations and 25,000 generators. Anyway, this change in Russian strategy has made it more difficult for the Ukrainians to advance for two reasons. Firstly, it's harder to make progress on the Russians when they're just focusing on defending, because normally when they're making their own Russian advances too, they're more open to counteroffensives. Secondly, Russian attacks on Ukrainian infrastructure have limited Ukraine's logistical capabilities. The Ukrainian military still relies on civilian infrastructure. They still need electricity and water, for example. And if Ukrainian authorities are busy rebuilding Ukraine's infrastructure, then they simply don't have as much time to supply equipment to the front lines. So, given that the front line has stabilized somewhat, does this mean that it's time for peace negotiations? Well, this is something that a couple of prominent people have recently suggested. Elon Musk, for example, recently took...
Who cares about Elon fucking Musk? Why is Elon Musk... I hate this shit. Elon Musk is is a great genius. He did great stuff. He made PayPal, Tesla, fucking SpaceX really cool. But why the fuck does his opinion matter?
Twitter to
You know why? Because people care. Millions of people click on his fucking
argue
shit.
that because the front lines have
I lost so much respect for him when he did that. I lost so much respect.
stabilized,
Fucking Elon Musk. I will never buy a
outlines
Tesla.
for a peace settlement are now clear. And agreeing to one as
Some
quickly as
fucking
possible
US tycoon
would limit the
telling
amount
us
of
how to do
human
the peace
suffering.
in Ukraine, man.
There were also reports just last
Unfucking-believable.
week that German Chancellor Olaf Scholz privately been arguing for peace negotiations too. Now, somewhat unsurprisingly, this hasn't gone down too well with most Ukrainians, both because they expect their forces to make further advances in the future,
Even
and
quoted
because
it?
many Ukrainians consider peace negotiations to be a form of appeasement
Never
that would
appease
only
Putin.
encourage Putin and
How did we
other
not learn from history? You can't
authoritarians
appease a tyrant
to
man
annex
like Hitler.
more territory in the future and wage more wars of aggression.
Cannot appease this country.
Ultimately, though, it doesn't really
And I
matter
think the
what
Ukrainians
Musk
know this.
or
I think all these Ukrainians, pretty much 90% of Ukrainians, they know these Westerners talking about our peace. This is our country. We're getting invaded here, man. You guys are just sending equipment. You don't do much else. We decide when this war is over and what peace means.
Scholz really think.
And we fucking Western idiots, we think we should
Because
tell them how to
neither
make
the
peace.
Ukrainians or the Russians are
The
interested
arrogance
in
of the
peace
West, man. The
negotiations
arrogance of
at
the
the
West,
moment.
as always.
As we just mentioned, the Ukrainians expect to take more territory. And
Never get into
that's
politics.
fair
I'm a
enough
Twitch
given
streamer.
their recent
I'm
history.
pretty much a full-time
and
politician,
Zelensky
bro.
has also repeatedly made it clear that he both wants and expects a return to the pre-2014
Yes.
borders,
Yes.
including both
That is the only way there
Donbass
can be
and
peace.
Crimea. Equally,
Yes.
the Russians won't be interested in peace negotiations until at least February, because they see winter as their best chance to extract
The
a
Russians and
concession
winter,
from
huh?
Ukraine and
History
the
repeats
West.
itself, man. Like,
Putin will clearly be
legit.
hoping that as temperatures fall across Europe, public sentiment towards Ukraine will wane, and European leaders will reduce their support for Zelensky. Similarly, Putin will hope that by crippling Ukraine's energy grid during a cold winter, he'll create sufficient misery
Literally going
among
for civilians,
Ukrainian
bro. Isn't there some kind of Geneva Convention about this? I feel like the most useless thing of all times is the Geneva Convention. Like, in a real war, no one fucking cares about that shit.
civilians
It's such
to
a
pressure
wasteful piece of
Zelensky
paper.
into negotiations. All in all, while things might have slowed down on the battlefield for now, peace negotiations.
In many
still
years,
look
my kid
a
is going to
long
ask me,
way
why
off.
didn't we help
But
Ukraine
if you
more?
want to be
And
updated as they
I don't
do
know what the fuck
happen,
to say.
Tuesday, Danes went to the polls to elect a new government. The incumbent Social Democrats were brought down by a report published a couple of months
What the fuck is this language?
ago, criticising their decision to cull the entirety of Denmark's mink population to protect against COVID during the pandemic.
Sucks being a mink nowadays, right? You just got fucking genocided. That's a big problem in Denmark. It's very important to certain Danish elites to sell the fur of the mink. Makes a lot of money. It's a luxury good, like in Victoria Free. And they just keep fucking breeding these motherfuckers for this really stupid product for a bunch of fucking rich white motherfuckers. Fucking sad, man. TommyKay, solidarization with the minks, bro.
In a bit of a shock result, the Red Bloc retained a narrow but outright majority, meaning that the Social Democrats Mette Frederiksen will stay on as Prime Minister.
But nothing really changes.
So, in this video, we're going to be taking a look at how a mink
Mink
culling
lives matter. They
scandal
fucking do.
brought down the government, how the Social Democrats held on to power regardless, and what this might mean for Danish politics going forward.
Every politician he shows in his intro is
Forward.
literally corrupt by proof. Corrupt by proof. Corrupt by proof. Don't know what that is. Don't need to talk about this fucking muppet.
So, before
Just
we get
think
into
about
the
it.
results, a bit of background.
Please Turkish subtitles. There you go, man.
The last election
you, Ahmed.
in Denmark was held in 2019, when the so-called Red Bloc won a majority.
Look, this is how Denmark votes. I know nothing about Denmark, but I would guess this is where all the fucking peasants live and they're kind of racist. And this is, probably it's not like that. And this is where all the educated rich motherfuckers lived, and that's why they vote red. I'm
With
guessing.
91 of the 179 seats available, allowing the Social Democrats leader
Like in every country, the peasants always vote right-wing and shit, right?
Mette Frederiksen to become Prime Minister. Denmark uses the additional member electoral system, which basically means that 139 MPs are elected in multi-member constituencies, and the 40 remaining seats
What's funny is in the last German election in North Germany, a Danish person, a citizen of Denmark, and I think also of Germany, I don't know how that works legally, has been voted into the North German parliament. Because in North Germany, they're so connected with Denmark that they actually voted for a Danish guy, being the first non-German in German parliament, which I think is beautiful. It's a beautiful sign of globalism.
Seats are distributed to
Very
match the
interesting
parliament to the
Imagine you're a Danish guy and you're a politician in Germany.
national vote share. The so-called
Danish
Red
master
Bloc, a
plan
coalition
continues.
of left-leaning parties led by the
my
Social
knee's super
Democrats
fucked, man. I never
won
had knee problems in my life, but now I have one.
49.2% of the vote, which
Time to
translated
get back
into
Schleswig-Holstein.
91 seats. Anyway, the main test for Fredriksen's government was the pandemic. And while she was originally lauded for her effective lockdown policies, which allowed Denmark to reopen its society before most of its European neighbours, her government has been roundly criticised for their
I mean, what government would not be criticized for COVID handling, man? You show me one government where the people are like, man, they did kind of good, man.
For context, Denmark is the world's largest producer of mink furs, with exports amounting to about
shit, man.
1
All he said comes down to one word. Ja klasik. Ja klasik is Turkish for they want to make a lot of money.
billion per annum on average, or about
kinda sad,
40% of the world's production.
40%
Prior to
of
the
the world's
pandemic, there were
production.
somewhere between 13.5 million and 17 million mink across roughly 800 Danish farms.
That is so fucking sad. I always feel like, man, you know, I'm not better than anyone. I'm not saying that, but I always imagine aliens looking at us and we are just such genociders, man. We genocide animals like so fucking massively, man. It's a complete and utter genocide, dude.
However, in June 2020, Danish authorities detected a strain of COVID, later named Cluster 5,
And then
in a
they killed
mink
all of them.
population in northern Denmark. The authorities ordered that all minks in any farm with even one case of Cluster 5 should be killed to prevent further infection.
Man, they killed millions,
Unfortunately,
bro.
this failed.
Imagine that's your job, man. Your name is fucking Mikke, and what did you do today? I was killing minks for 8 hours.
To stop
Fucking
the
hell,
spread
dude.
of the virus. And by early October, Cluster 5 had spread to over 60 mink farms in northern Denmark. The government then expanded the order to require that any mink within an 8-kilometre radius of a detected case be culled.
Wolf been dead
But
anyways.
once
You show me
again,
proof of
the
that.
spread
It
continued.
doesn't. This
was
sounds
pretty
very
worrying stuff because scientists in the
non-saucy.
Netherlands had found evidence that COVID could be passed from mink to human, and the Danish authorities worried that this could cause new mutations of COVID
They got
in
money from the
humans,
state from that?
which could in turn undermine
pressed the
vaccine
subsidize
efficacy.
button.
This is why on November the 3rd, the Staten Serum Institute published a new risk assessment which concluded that continued mink breeding during an ongoing COVID-19 epidemic poses a significant risk to public health,
Biggest problem in
including the
Denmark is fucking
possibilities of
minks, dude, I swear to
preventing
God.
COVID-19 with vaccines. The next day, the government ordered the culling of Denmark's entire mink population, offering bonuses for farmers that killed their mink quickly. The mink were killed by exposure to carbon monoxide before being either incinerated or buried.
Yeah,
This is
at
where
least they had a
things started
chill
going
death, I guess.
downhill for the government. Obviously, the optics here
minkies.
were pretty terrible in the first place. Whatever
It's nice to think, though, that the biggest problem in your country and the biggest topic of an election is the fucking minks, dude. If you look at USA, kind of
the
different.
epidemiological merits, the government has essentially ordered the genocide of millions of cute fluffy things. This spelled the end for Denmark's mink
first president
industry,
did not like
which had
this shit.
previously employed some 6,000 people. It got worse a month later when some buried mink started resurfacing, because the nitrogen and phosphorus gases produced by their decay had created air bubbles underneath the bodies. This meant that the 4 million or so mink that had been buried had to be dug up and incinerated. On top of this, the government also faced some more substantial criticisms. For starters, there was some skepticism about the idea that new COVID variants transmitted by mink could undermine vaccine efficacy.
back after
The
that.
Danish Medicines Agency, the University of Copenhagen, and the Danish Health Authority all disputed the idea that mink variants would undermine vaccine efficacy, and others also suggested that the total mink
Jesus,
cull
man.
was unnecessary.
Human
or
race
at
is
least
very
could
interesting.
have been
Thank
avoided
you for
had the
18
government's
months,
original
UK.
measures
Thank you, sir.
been more
Have
effective.
fun in uni.
It also turned out that the government's original order had no legal basis, which is one of the
18
reasons the
months.
estimated
Close to 2 years, less than
compensation
3
owed
can't
to
be
mink
really
farmers
active since I
has
started uni this
skyrocketed
year.
to about
Wish me luck,
$2.5
smiley face.
billion.
Since I played Wiki Free, I'm seeing the whole world as a Wiki Free game, man. Like, dude, your GDP just dropped massively, dude.
For context, that's about half their military budget in 2020. In April 2021, the Danish government set up a mink commission to investigate the whole affair. The Mink Commission's report was finally published on June the 30th of this year, and it was deeply critical. The report concluded that the government lacked the legal authority to order the mink cull.
They did an illegal fucking genocide mode. That's what fucking happened, man. This is on the same level than fucking Turkey and China,
and
bro.
criticised
What do you mean, Tommy? What do you mean, Turkey? What do you
certain
mean?
cabinet members for failing to provide certain information. Fredriksson was forced to call an election in early October after the Social Liberals threatened to withdraw from her coalition, which took place on Tuesday. Now, Danish politics has previously been dominated by the centre-left Red Bloc, led by the Social Democrats, and a centre-right Blue Bloc, led by Venstre. However, these elections saw the introduction of the moderates, a new centrist party formed this year by former Venstre leader and two-time Prime Minister Lars Løkke Rasmussen, which refused to align itself with either bloc ahead of the results and looked likely to play kingmaker in the event of a split parliament. This is what the polls were predicting, but in a shock result, preliminary results announced on Wednesday morning suggested that the Red Bloc had outperformed expectations and secured a narrow 90-seat majority. The Social Democrats saw their best result in more than 20 years, winning 27.6% of the vote and 50 seats. It seemed that voters thought the Social Democrats and the Red Bloc were better placed to deal with the cost of living crisis sweeping Europe, which was the focus of the campaign. Fredriksson said she didn't want to lead another Red Bloc government, instead proposing a new centrist alliance comprising parties from both the Red and Blue blocs, as well as Rasmussen's new Moderates party, which won 9% of the vote from 16 seats. Fredriksson has proposed something similar in the past, and the two main parties cooperated on a new, larger defence budget in the wake of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Her basic argument
bigger defense budget, man. How are they going to pay for it with all these dead
is
minks
that, in times
and
of
the farmers?
crisis, it's not appropriate for the government
now
to have a tiny majority representing only one half of the electorate. A purple alliance would also limit the influence of smaller, more extreme parties, who are often excluded in the red or blue blocs.
They're going to
so
build the Lego
far, the blue
minefield.
bloc parties have resisted Fredriksson's proposal.
I hope one day I can bring my kid to Legoland Denmark, just not because I want to make him happy, because I want to see Legoland,
So
bro.
it remains to be seen whether or not it'll actually happen. It'll definitely take a while to negotiate, which is why it'll probably take weeks, if not months, for the new government to be formed.
That's what democracy does.
However, if a purple bloc does emerge, it could usher in a new age of Danish politics.
I like purple. Purple is like a political color in Europe of progress, of the future, right? Of centrism. We see it with Volt and stuff in Germany. Purple seems to be the color of a lot of parties emerging now that are really progressive, man. I like that. The purple parties,
away
man,
from a system centered around the left-right divide to a more consensual model of politics.